Our final presentation this morning is from Dr. Elizabeth Nielsen. She's with the Consumers Council of Canada. She's a member of the board of that organization and associated with Canadian Standards Association and the policy committee of the ISO. She's extensive experience working with consumer interests and bringing consumer interest to bear on decision-making as a civil servant in the Government of Canada and a couple of departments, and also as a representative and leader of the Consumers Association, Consumers Council of Canada, I beg your pardon. She's worked, as I mentioned, advising federal and provincial governments, the OECD, and in that capacity she's carried out an extensive study on nanotechnology and its impact on consumers for the Consumers Council of Canada. So I bring the representative of we the people.
Actually, we worked together on SEPA. You don't remember that. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm going to bring a different perspective to the table, and I'm quite sure that many of you engineers and scientists, I am a scientist myself, are not going to necessarily agree with what I have to say because it's a little bit different. It's based consumer attitudes and consumer perspective on surveys that we did for the Consumers Council, but also surveys that have been done by universities in Canada, the University of Alberta, for instance, the Wilson Center for International Scholars in the United States, and in Europe by the EC. So and they all were giving similar types of results. Okay, let's see where here we go. Now, when you talk about nanomaterials or nano objects in consumer products, what you're looking at is a wide range. And I'm sure that if you went around your home today, that there would be quite a number of products in your home, whether you realize it or not, that have nanomaterials in them. They're used for a number of different properties, the catalytic effect with respect to better and improved batteries, like you might have in tools or for storage of energy, electrical in terms of the miniaturization of the computer products, cell phones, etc. The biological in terms of drugs and cosmetics and medical devices. These are big areas that consumers think should have nanomaterials in them. Then, of course, you have the identification, as was mentioned earlier, with respect to contaminated food and being able to identify it with the packaging. The physical, mechanical strength. You're probably all wearing stain-resistant or wrinkle-resistant clothing. It's being used for its low weight as well, and the strength going into things like hockey sticks and racket of all different types. And then, of course, if you're lucky enough to own a Mercedes, you have, of course, the scratch-resistant paint on the Mercedes that is based on nanomaterials. And there's some new products coming out as far as coating that you can put on your outdoor furniture or your outdoor wood so that it will repel any of the dirt that may accumulate. This is a graph based on the consumer product inventory at the Woodrow Wilson School for International Scholars, and they have a project on emerging nanotechnologies, and they set up this inventory, and it's based on manufacturers or third parties voluntarily telling them or putting on the inventory products that they say have nanomaterials in them. And you can see when they started 10 years ago, 2005, there was 54 products, and it's now up to over 1,800 products. These are consumer products ranging all over the place. There's hundreds of them. The type of nano objects that are used in the consumer products according to the work that they've been doing, is nano silver, of course, which is used extensively in a lot of products for its antibacterial properties. You know, things like Band-Aids, even pacifiers for children and teddy bears. You get it everywhere, to the extent, I think, that it's impacting on the immune system of people. And you're getting a lot of asthma. My husband's an immunologist, and he keeps telling me this. Nanocarbon tubes, of course, are being used because they're very strong, lightweight. They have electrical products that are much more effective than copper, for example. They're used for drug delivery type of systems, sports equipment, computer monitors. Dodge has a lot of their auto bumpers are made out of nanomaterials, so that they'll be stronger and you get an extra added safety in the vehicle. You have nano-titanium, and of course you're probably all familiar with that in your sunscreens that you use, the ones that don't appear as white, they appear as being translucent. You also have it, for instance, if you want self-cleaning windows, you can have coatings put on based on nano-titanium, which will break down the dirt with the sunlight, and the rain takes away all your dirt, so you don't have to wash your windows anymore. Nano-silica, if you want to get anti-scratch paints. Nano-zinc, again, for UV protection. And nano-gold, in terms of diagnostics and imaging, is playing a big role, improving the detection of disease, or if you have a pregnancy test, that's what's in the pregnancy test. Benefits for consumers. There are some phenomenal benefits of nano-enabled products for the consumer. In the medical field, of course, the business of having drugs that are targeting the diseases and the disease cells with reduced side effects. And if you're doing chemotherapy, if you've seen the reaction that happens, if you can have a drug that goes directly to the cancer cell, this is phenomenal. Sensing devices that are implanted in terms of giving you real-time measurement of things like blood pressure, temperature, glucose levels if you're diabetics, so that you don't actually all the time have to keep taking the little blood samples. The rebuilding of nerves and tissues, building up a structure that you can rebuild a lot of these things. And this a lot, I think, was being done by the U.S. Army with respect to some of the veterans that are coming back injured from Afghanistan and Iran. Then the approved imaging of diagnostics, so you can identify the disease at an early enough stage you can do something. And of course, the antibacterial agents. This is a really big field. Consumers are very supportive of this type of action because they're being overseen originally, they're being looked at and approved, and also they're under the supervision of a medical professional. Energy efficiency, improved production of alternative energies, improved energy storage, and reduced energy consumption. As you get into lighter vehicles, for instance, what you're doing is using less gas to be able to move it along. Insulation is being improved. Environmental effects. We've heard a lot about what's happening with respect to the environment. Removal of contaminants from water and soil, the potential of that in developing countries is phenomenal. Then the sensor arrays to identify the presence of contaminants. Food safety. Now, food safety is an area which people are very, very concerned about. The safety aspect is fine, but they're very concerned about anything being added to the food supply. It's almost, they're very, very sensitive about that. But the idea of having packaging that warns of contaminated food is great. The same type of sensors could be used in a manufacturing plant to indicate where there is contamination taking place, nutrients going directly to where they're needed, and there's sensors in animals now to identify pathogens that may be present in them. Then, of course, there's the nice to have. Cosmetics to prevent aging, although consumers think that shouldn't be done. Because it's not really necessary. In Europe now, they're all labeled cosmetics that contain nanomaterials. It's not happening here, unfortunately. Stronger hockey sticks, tennis rackets, you name it. Scratch-resistant auto paint, self-cleaning windows. That would be great if I had self-cleaning windows. and wrinkle and stain resistant clothing, which most any of you, and last of all, socks that don't smell. Unfortunately, the the nano silver they add to them to reduce the smell from these socks, it gets washed out mostly in the first wash. 90% of it disappears into the water supply from studies that have been down in Arizona. This is, I'm not going to talk about this. This is, if you have copies of these slides later, this lists a lot of the products that are present on the consumer product inventory at the Wilson Center, and there's a lot of them. And in fact, in the future, of course, you're going to get a lot better sensors with respect to right on the film, particles that provide antibacterial protection, textile fabrics that charge your cell phones, delivery of chemotherapy drugs. Well, we have to move along here. The concerns raised about consumer products, now these are the things that you may not agree with. It's the impact of nanomaterials on the health of the public. They're very concerned about in the environment. Basic definitions are not there. Scientists, governments, and NGOs have raised concerns about it. The Canadian public has little confidence in the government with respect to being able to manage these. Not so much because they don't think the people are trying to do a good job, it's just that the government doesn't have enough resources and the technology is changing so quickly they can't keep up with it. And the fact that products containing nanomaterials are not labeled, so they cannot figure out what they want to buy, making purchasing decisions. And for most consumer products, there's no pre-market evaluation. The other thing you have is the public knowledge of nanotechnology is almost non-existent. What we heard from them was the comment, silence, definite silence coming from industry and government about nanomaterials in these products, why they're there, how they're going to be used. 80% of Canadians don't know what nanotechnology means, and they don't know that you have nanotechnology in the products around them. These are the ones, these issues here, I think, from a scientific perspective, you need to start thinking about. These are the ethical, legal, and societal issues. If you don't pay attention to these, you may go ahead and make all these developments, but if they could basically impact the public to the point where they won't buy your product, period. Or they'll set up a barrier that you can't get over. They want to know who's making the decisions. They want to know who's being affected by these decisions. Is there a gap between the poor and the rich, between developed countries and developing countries? Are people being put out of work as a result of this in developing countries? What's the impact on the environment? And then what is the impact on privacy? You have sensors by which you can basically track, and you would know you had them on you, an Alzheimer's patient, so you know exactly where they are, or you could do it with your teenage daughter and find out where she's going and what she's doing. Canadians are extremely concerned about this privacy. And you can put these sensors in the paint in a railway station, and they have, and it will tell you whether you've got chemicals on you or whether you've got all sorts of devices on you. It also can tack into the big data sources. So they can tell you just about everything about you in less than a minute. So it's quite interesting. And so a lot of these things are basically, could create a crisis with respect to the acceptance of nanotechnology. And this is just some of the factors that are associated with that in terms of the risks unfamiliar, you're being exposed involuntarily, there's a lot of scientific uncertainty around it, media attention, etc. And most of the information consumers are getting about nanotechnology is from the media. So the challenge is, for you, is how to realize the societal benefits, and they are excellent in many cases, while minimizing the adverse impacts that could be created because the public does not necessarily accept what you're doing. So you're going to have to think pretty hard about that.